We're at a home farm in Climping. It's about 1,300 acres, arable farming. No livestock here. We grow milling wheats, seed peas, oats and oilseed rape. Agricultural memories are my early memories. Having a lot of fun in the harvest fields. We used to hide in the straw, and my mother was terrified of that. Tractors running around, busy harvest. As farmers, you know every field and the problems that are within that field. So yeah, you are very, very connected to the land. And this area, yeah, a great affinity for this area. My father came here as a tenant farmer in 1966. I've succeeded to him. I now manage the estate in a wholly different manner to how he managed it. As we're driving along here, we can see an example of field margins. We haven't planted these margins. These are just the natural plants that have grown when we've stopped farming them, been turned across to nature. We're heading down here towards the coast. We've got 2 miles of beach frontage. This is the last undeveloped stretch of coastline in Sussex, where you can drive from the fields onto the beach. And you come to this farm and you realise actually there is some wilderness left in this part of West Sussex. We're just going to our beach cafe. I've got a Ukrainian family that are running that this year, so we're just going over to say hi. Hi Natalia, how are you?
Very good.
Yeah?
Yes.
You busy?
Busy? I don't know.
So Valeria, when she was in Ukraine, I'm going to say this correctly, I think, agricultural meteorologist.
Yeah.
So involved in that side of agriculture, and has come here, and she was working in a kitchen in a pub up near Arundel, and then this opportunity came that she could have the cafe for the summer, together with her mother and Alicia, 7?
7, yeah.
Her daughter. So 3 generations have been helping here all summer. Valeria's from Odessa, and she came to the beach one evening and the tide was high, and she came the next day and the tide was out, and she said to me, "Where has the sea gone?" And in Odessa is the Black Sea, which has had to come through the Mediterranean Sea, and they don't have tides there. We worry about the weather that's with us, the weather that's been, and the weather that's coming. If it's been a really, really wet time in the prior month, then the soils right now would be too wet to do anything with. And then we look forward at the weather forecasts and we worry at what's coming. And sometimes we've got to squeeze 2 weeks of work into 2 days because everything's about to change, and sometimes that happens really unexpectedly. So you really never can switch off from farming. You can't. When it's chucking the rain every day and your harvest's being ruined and your drying costs are going through the roof, the mental health impact, it's really quite severe. You know, we've got hides like rhinos, but they're soft underbellies. You know, it's not all sweetness and light and honey. In 2020, we had Storm Chiara. Whilst the rest of the country were going into lockdown and battling COVID, we were battling the coast here. The sea broke through. We had a couple of 100 acres that were under 2 foot of seawater. That's a fifth of our farming acreage. Terrifying to see how powerful nature can be. There's a community at Rope Walk. There's a lot of elderly residents down there. Other residents at the bottom end of Climping. It was terrifying for them. I've never seen so many dead earthworms, and I just remember feeling sunken in my heart that that land is now devoid of the biology that was in it. The salt water will have killed it. Mother Nature is a formidable foe. That's my son standing underneath a groin. So you can see not only is there erosion happening on the shoreline, but the beaches have dropped. So as the shingle and the sand has washed away, they've dropped by several metres. You can see the power of the sea here. Every cubic metre is a ton smashing into the shoreline. And then that's the flooded farmland. You can see the seabirds are enjoying it. Here we can see when the seawater first started coming over into some of the fields near Pool Place. That was a real shock for us. That was the moment where we realised we need to have a vision for this place. This is the bottom end of Climping Street. It was a significant incident. Fire service and other rescue services were involved. This is showing you that Ferry Road is cut, so that community had difficulty getting in and out. And there's Little Hampton just in the back there, 3 feet of seawater across the fields. It left a lot of damage. There's my daughter and our dog at the bottom of Climping Street. You can see here an eroding cliff line. The lines are where we've planted to. The crop hasn't even had time to grow, and yet we've lost 4 or 5 metres. And there we can see the aftermath. There was an embankment that had run across here, and the sea just smashed it to smithereens. And of course, coastal erosion is nothing new. The hamlet of Atherington was out here. That's actually covered by seawater now, but there are 4 well bottoms. One of them's medieval. We can see parts of old buildings that were here, and the street of Climping ran out into where that hamlet was. And just around the corner was the village of Cudlow. Cudlow had its own church, it had school buildings there, and a windmill. That went under the sea in the 1580s. So running through the Tudor period, they didn't have the engineering abilities to contain coastal erosion. It was really through the Victorian period where they managed to industrialise coastal defence. We saw then the beginnings of the groin fields, the concrete walls to defend the shores against erosion. And that position of the coastline was fixed for around about 200 years. The Environment Agency managed the beach. They would push the beaches up with bulldozers to maintain a shingle barrier. They also maintained the wooden groin structures. We always had shingle on the beach, and then that kept the sea out from the land. If you fast forward to 2015, the Environment Agency took the decision to cease the maintenance here at Climping. As soon as there was no protection, the shingle was stripped away in serious storms. We had beaches that were 30 feet wide that were then down to no shingle whatsoever, just the bed chalk and clay. And so sitting behind that were earthen banks and walls without footings. And when they collapsed, then the sea came in a really major way. All the while that the Environment Agency were performing their maintenance, we never had a serious flood incident. This here was sticking out into the sea and was protected by a groin field that protected the shingle, that then protected the walls. And you take the groins away, the shingle goes away, the walls get undermined, and then this part of the beach needs to move northwards. You can't sustain it here. You can see here, nature's starting to push this back. It's rolling that beach back to where nature wants it. And when the sea could get at the feet of these walls, they just simply collapsed. And if you just look at the size of them, these cubes weigh about 10 tons each. This section that I'm touching with my hands is probably 30 tons. If you take that political will and take the investment away, this is what happens. It is incredibly different to how it was. So in front of here was a wide shingle beach that has now gone. That's moved down the coast and sits in front of the dune system down here. The beach levels have dropped, and then we're starting to see sand coming back in. It's a very dynamic environment. It's a great example here of how these walls have evolved. So you can see here, this is the walls that Christ Hospital put in. This was their idea of a crude flood defence. And then you can see there's this sort of ramshackle, it's very loose, stones just fall out of it, that was built on the back of these walls. And then this much stronger cap has come across the top of it that's got some steel reinforcing in it. This is the part that was put on in the Second World War to defend soldiers. They were stationed here, they were on lookout for planes coming across the channel, but none of it corrected the fact that there were no footings. A lot of the soldiers who made these cubes wrote their names in them. Graffiti of the day, I guess. And I found along here the other day. Yeah, just here. It says Bill Granfield of Treorchy. It's a small town in Wales. There's still Granfield family members there, and they remember a Billy Granfield who ran a motor shop. That's 83 years ago. Someone scratched their name into that, and there it remains. It was a 20-foot drop on this side. Once the beach had washed away, the sea started to punch underneath the wall, and then they started to sag in the middle. Hundreds of tons of concrete that were hanging. There was lots of conversations with our insurers, with Environment Agency, with Natural England, Arran District Council. It became clear that these were our walls and they were our responsibility. This for us was something wholly new, something that we had never dealt with before. An eroding coastline where you've got collapsing walls. They were never designed as flood defences. These sections weigh tens of tons and you get picnicking families sheltering underneath them. We just cannot leave them standing, so we have to take those down and lay them on the beach. I can remember playing on those walls as a kid. That's what is so difficult about managing a shoreline that is going through such a dramatic transformation. Part of what is forged within you is taken away from you and you have no control over it. People have such fond memories. This is 1949, so not long after the war has ended. A couple who have come down to the beach for the weekend, a chance to dip in the sea. We can see the old eel traps here, so that's what gives the village of Elmer its name. This is a much older picture at the turn of the prior century, down at Poole Place. We can see here children with their parents on the beach. So when people come now and they see that the shingle beach has washed away, the concrete walls have collapsed, the challenge for us is to show to people that the future beach will be beautiful and new memories will be forged. This is my sister at the beach. She used to work the cafe down there for years. This is the old catering van. I worked in these since I was 12 years old, flipping burgers and serving ice creams. This is my wife, family days out.
We're just outside St Mary's School in Climping. We came here when I was 4 years old and I went to the school pretty much after that, so I was there until I was 11. It's bringing back the memories hearing the bell. This is Bread Lane, where we used to walk and ride down to the beach, and we lived across there in the farmhouse. When I was about 5 years old, a school friend and we were picking blackberries, but we were lost for about 4 hours and no one could find us because they couldn't see down the lane because of the high hedges each side. My memory is very strong of these hedges, which were full of birds, full of blackberries, full of everything. By the time I was 8, the hedges had been removed as part of the farming methods at the time, but it wasn't until when James started replanting some of the vegetation and the hedgerows that I realised that I had been missing these hedgerows. It's just wonderful, and I wholeheartedly am fully involved and supportive of the regeneration of our farm.
Back in the 70s, it was big is beautiful, and the farmers were encouraged to get rid of hedgerows and trees and the like, and the habitat really degraded, so much so that some of the hedgerows where birds nested were gone, trees where they actually fed and nested were gone, and it would be possible to look across a huge open field and see virtually no birds because all the things that they need to feed up were gone.
Each generation has its challenges, and my father's generation, their priority was food security. In the years after the war, grants were given to remove hedgerows, remove trees, make the landscape efficient, and we demonstrated how easy it is to destroy an ecosystem. That wasn't the ambition, but it was a result of those policies, a hangover from the war. I had a light bulb moment a number of years ago that there must be an alternative way. Some of the stuff I've done is controversial within the farming community. For some people, putting back nature on the land is not a priority. A lot of these hedges here were hammered every year with hedge cutters to maintain the field boundaries. I actually sold the hedge cutter. I stopped using it. It was gathering dust and I sold it. And so we don't cut around the field boundaries at all now. But they've become really quite complex habitats. So what we've planted here is quite a diverse mixture of plants. Multiple species have gone in here. It's great habitat for birds, a whole host of insects. But looking at it in the longer term, we've also been careful to choose plants that we know are tolerant to the effects of the sea. The roots will get down and form strong mats in the soil, and eventually they will become the front line in slowing the pace of coastal erosion. And it's not a habitat that would have been uncommon here before the fields were cleared for arable land use. But one plant that was never here was sea buckthorn that we've planted. Popular in Scandinavian countries. Very citrusy, but they've got quite a bitter aftertaste. Yeah. So you asked me how would I describe myself. I'm an agricultural experimentalist. I enjoy being a custodian of this landscape. It's responsible that we produce food for society. It's responsible that we do right by nature. It's as simple as that. I've taken some of our land and I've repurposed it. So there's a new tenant has moved in. Nature. We still do our best at food production, maximise the production off of that land as best we can. And we also want the other land to be the best part of the ecosystem that it can be. To my left is a corner that we've left, and I can see 100 different plant species. So these are what some people refer to as weeds. I call them hero plants. These are the plants that nature's looking for.
It's the old story, what price nature? It's hard to quantify, what value is it? But when it's gone, we will know what value it is. I've known James quite a while. I've seen a huge change in him. All credit, James. To me, this is heaven on earth. When you've got an environment that works well with nature, I've seen with my own eyes what happens when we do treat it badly, and I'm pleased to say I'm seeing the reverse now.
People weren't aware that back in 2009 we were tackling the Environment Agency. On their policy change, we took them to the High Court. It did expose that we didn't have a strategy of our own. We stalemated with the EA. We needed to start thinking about what our future would look like. If the government couldn't afford to keep the sea out, we weren't going to be able to afford to keep the sea out. So what would the landscape look like if it was heavily salted at least every 5 years, and perhaps every year? We then developed this strategy, but the land will be repurposed for nature. So we've prepared this vision here for how the landscape might look. As an arable farmer, the flooding of farmland is a threat to us. So trying to look for the opportunity in that has been challenging, but it's really important that we have more nature areas. To see this as a vision that's great for nature, is great for people to come and understand and observe nature, is a wonderful opportunity. Salt marsh plants are already beginning to establish. The seeds are carried in on the seawater. We have sea beet, sea kale, sea blight, samphire, nature restoring what should be there. This central part is a delta of the Arun, and it's only because the River Arun was channeled in the prior centuries that this was drained and then recovered for arable farming use. It's very low lying, and so the salt water will go through and restore that part of the delta. And of course it all goes hand in hand with what's going on out in the sea. The Sussex Bay Kelp Restoration Project run by the Sussex Wildlife Trust is a really exciting project. The last remaining part of the kelp forest was still intact here off of Climping Beach. That ecosystem is being restored at speed. We're starting to see predators moving back in. So we've angel sharks, dolphins and rays are coming in. And we're starting to see the fish species. Because of the way that the seabed is being managed now, their abundance is increasing. We see seals bobbing up and down in the sea, and occasionally they come ashore, and we've had pups born here. It'd be great if we could have an exclusion area where they can start to establish a colony. That would be something really special. People come here, they will be stunned by the diversity of bird life that this site will attract. Wading birds are already moving in. A local bird watcher told me when he was a kid there were flocks of oyster catchers 500 strong. Nowadays we see them in the dozens. It would be fantastic to see them build those numbers back up again. It would be great to see the ring plovers nesting on the stones, dunlins, ruddy turnstones. The sandlings that we have here, they're a nationally important population, and they feed here at the low tide mark in the winter time, and then they go back up to the Arctic during the breeding season. So they're really welcome visitors. One really important aspect of this is the grasslands for Brent geese. The Brent geese come here from the Russian high Arctic each winter, and they eat my wheat crops, and we chase them because they do a lot of damage to our crops. And it'd just be great to let them have space. We're going to continue farming the areas that we can. We want to farm those in a nature-friendly way. Some farmland over here may become tide-locked, that we'll be able to access that at lower tide. We took the name from a map of the farm from 1606. This area was called Stroodelande. You can see it's in Old English. Coastal erosion has always been part of the story here. The shoreline is currently somewhere about where I'm running my finger through here. I think in time Climping is going to stand out as being a jewel, very nature rich. People will be really proud. You can see the field in the background covered in seagulls there. We had a crop of peas growing here in 2019, and that was the last crop that we took off of this land. The amount of salt that came in here was so strong that we couldn't farm it anymore. And so we've got plans to establish salt marsh down here. It's very important habitat. We started noticing more goldfinches, linnets, bullfinches. It was like the African savanna. Nature's getting on with the job. We are running to catch up with what's going on here. We have to respect the past and we have to look forwards. The removal of the timber groin structures is already a positive. The beach has a much more natural feel. The concrete's been left in situ at the moment because it does slow the rate of the erosion. So we have to live with it for a time. And then eventually that stable bay will start to form. All of the timber gone, all of the concrete gone, and future generations will forge their memories with that landscape that they see. This vision of what the beach will be, what sort of habitat we'll be looking at, what wildlife can we expect to see, that's my role. The shingle is moved down the shoreline by the Atlantic long swell, and as it hits the River Arun, it causes a navigation problem. So the Harbour Board pull that shingle back out, and then historically the Environment Agency have been recycling that and putting it back further to our west. Now they ceased doing that, but the shingle continues to work its way in that direction. We're now at the bottom of Bread Lane. A decision's been made to step back in. The emergency works. The Environment Agency are using these machines to run shingle from the river back along here to bolster up the defences. So they have been using it to form these banks as the beach is eroding. And it's to protect the homes of Atherington here, protect the farmland. The community of Atherington has come together. We've funded transport of shingle to try and slow down the rate of erosion, to keep people in their properties for longer. The shingle bank that we've helped the Environment Agency to establish is nearly a kilometre long now. Some of the houses can't be saved, we know that, but we can buy time. The people have got a long history of coming to Climping Beach. In the heyday before foreign holidays, these beaches were rammed with people. All the car parks were filled. We would spill over into the arable fields. We hope that people will come to see nature, go off on longer distance walks around the farm. What we're trying to achieve is that balance where we don't overload the beach with visitors. We're down at the Climping Beach car park now. These car parks are shrinking as the coast is evolving. That process is going to continue to the point where the cafe and the toilet block will eventually succumb. We've spent the summer consulting with the community, and we've made a decision that we will replace the car park and cafe, move it back from the shoreline. It takes the traffic away from the centre of the village. It makes sense to put it off the floodplain. It future-proofs it. The cafe's been in temporary buildings. We'd like to build a permanent building, one that respects the local vernacular. Within the cafe, there'll be a discovery centre about the Sussex Bay, what's happening in the sea, the landscape, the farming systems. This place is so steeped in history. We've got a hand axe here that's been dated to 60,000 years old. These oyster shells, this was the diet of the people at the time. These are semi-fossilised, probably 50,000 years old. Pottery from the Bronze Age that we've been pulling out the cliff line. Shards of a bronze bowl. Medieval. This is an Iron Age funerary urn, fully intact. It still has ashes and remains within it, so it's currently down at Littlehampton Museum where it's being evaluated. It's the second one to have been found, so we now know that we're looking at a significant cremation site down there. And then probably from the 1950s or 60s, a child's tin spade. It shows that there's been people in this area for millennia. This is the transition zone. We've got the kelp forest recovering. We've got the shingle banks that the Environment Agency installed, and they're being pushed back by the bigger storms. As the seawater comes over, we can see here these coastal plants are establishing here. The salt marsh is establishing itself. That transition has already begun. We can see that running down through the river valley, through the farm, as that natural habitat now is beginning to establish. We're discovering that working with nature is better for business. We've reduced our costs as our cultivation techniques have changed. We're not ploughing anymore, we're now minimum tillage cultivating. The amount of time that we spend in the tractor cabs has reduced. One tractor went from 900 hours a year down to 300 hours a year, burning less fuel. So the farming system is becoming more efficient. The trick is maintaining our output, and we're managing to do that. People feel a connection to the farm. They watch the activities going on throughout the year, the harvest and the natural cycle of things, and they begin to notice that the wildlife is coming back. People come and talk to me about what can they do with their gardens. They want to do the right thing. The State of Nature report tells us about the dramatic declines that we've seen in bird numbers. Some species are down by as much as 95% since the 1970s. But what we can't count is the impact on the insects. And we all know when we drive about, our windscreens are not getting that insect splatter. There's nothing. And so we know that we've got a problem. As farmers, we've become addicted to ag chemistry solutions. In these hedgerows, there are predatory insects that can eat aphids. So where we've been using insecticides to control aphids, because aphids carry diseases, then we need to find ways of getting those predatory insects to do that work for us. We'll look at taking the nature areas up to about 25% of the farm turned over to nature. As farming goes through a transition, if each farmer makes small changes, it will make massive differences. We can capture carbon in these soils if we just adapt our cultivation techniques. But farmers are just part of the solution. The seed companies have got to start to develop insect-resistant varieties. So then we reduce our reliance on insecticides. The insecticides have got to change, so the chemical companies have got to become involved. Farmers have got a really important role in it, but we can't do it on our own. This is a whole societal issue. We've already begun our journey towards carbon neutrality, net zero. We've begun our work with biodiversity restoration, and there's still much more to do. When visitors come, we would like them to enjoy seeing those wading birds. And if you can see those birds, then there's something underneath that's sustaining them. And that's insects and seeds. These are ecosystems working. When I'm grey and old, greyer and older, and people ask me, what did I do about the climate crisis? What did I do about the biodiversity crisis? I'll have no problems at all in telling them what I did. How we've adapted our farming systems to reduce our reliance on artificial nitrogen fertilisers, reduced our carbon footprint, and what we did to restore biodiversity. That'll be a really proud legacy for me.